Have you ever stopped to think about why, as we age, we sometimes find ourselves in relationships that leave us feeling more empty than fulfilled? Why is it that, particularly in later years, many people are drawn into desires that, in the end, bring more harm than good? In today's video, we're going to take a closer look at 4 key reasons why entering romantic relationships in our later years can be a risky endeavor, and how you can protect yourself from making emotional decisions that may lead to regret. You'll discover how to recognize and guard against gold-digging scammers who take advantage of vulnerable hearts, how to avoid being swept up by physical desires that cloud your judgment, and the dangers of obsession and unchecked greed in relationships. We'll dive into practical strategies for managing your emotions, staying grounded, and maintaining inner peace, even when loneliness might try to sway you. If you're looking for ways to approach relationships with greater wisdom, protect your heart, and make wiser choices as you grow older, this video is for you. Stick around until the end, and you'll gain valuable insights that will change how you approach love, connection, and self-worth as you navigate this stage of life. Together, let's explore how to build relationships that are mindful, fulfilling, and aligned with your true values. Before we dive in, if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an update. Your support truly means the world to me, and if you found this video helpful, please consider liking and sharing it to spread these valuable lessons to others. First, beware of con artists seeking money. The term romantic relationship often stirs excitement in our hearts, but sometimes, the scent of money can stir those emotions even more powerfully. Let me tell you a story about an elderly man named Frank, who had worked hard all his life and finally reached his golden years. After losing his wife and feeling the weight of loneliness, Frank met a woman named Diane, who seemed to bring joy and light into his life. After only a few months of dating, Diane seemed so caring and affectionate that Frank thought he had found true love. One day, she said to him, "Love is about sharing, Frank. You've worked so hard. Let me help you take care of things, like managing your finances. I want us to be one in everything, including our financial future." In his eagerness to trust her, Frank was swept up in her warmth and kind gestures. He handed her access to his bank account, believing that he could finally relax and share his wealth with someone special. But the next morning, he woke up to an empty bank account and a voicemail from Diane saying she had to leave town unexpectedly. Frank sat in his empty apartment, reflecting on the saying his father used to tell him, "Love is about giving, but too much can leave you with nothing." Unfortunately, in his search for companionship, Frank lost both his money and his sense of security. His story is one many older adults fall victim to, as the loneliness that often accompanies aging can make us vulnerable to people who prey on our emotional needs. These so-called emotional predators manipulate people's loneliness to gain access to their resources and, when they've gotten what they want, vanish without a trace. Psychologists often warn about how loneliness can cloud our judgment, making us more trusting and easily taken advantage of. As Frank learned the hard way, it's important to balance emotional connections with wisdom. A famous American writer, Maya Angelou, once said, "When people show you who they are, believe them the first time." This advice applies especially in later years when trust can sometimes be a double-edged sword. It's crucial to protect your assets and heart from those who might exploit them. The question you need to ask yourself is, can you tell the difference between love and manipulation? Or are you too caught up in the desire for connection to see the truth? Second, it's easy to be swayed by physical greed in old age. There's an old saying, "Love knows no age," and while that may be true in many ways, as we grow older, our desires, especially physical ones, can sometimes surprise us in unexpected ways. It's not uncommon for older adults to feel a shift in their emotions and yearn for intimacy again. But, much like an unexpected storm, physical desire can sometimes come on strong, only to leave you feeling vulnerable and confused. The shift in our hormonal balance can make things feel almost like a strange joke, an unexpected desire that doesn't align with our usual sense of self. Take the story of Arthur, a 75-year-old retired schoolteacher in California, who had always prided himself on being a logical, disciplined person. After his wife passed away several years ago, Arthur felt the pangs of loneliness more than he had expected. One day, he met Helen, a woman in her early 60s, who charmed him with her lively spirit and youthful energy. They quickly grew close, and soon, their relationship took a romantic turn. However, Arthur began to notice a strange thing happening. He felt a longing he hadn't experienced in years, a desire for physical closeness, something he hadn't anticipated would resurface at his age. But as the relationship deepened, Arthur started to lose his sense of balance. He found himself becoming fixated on the physical aspects of their relationship, which clouded his judgment and made him overlook red flags. People around him started to notice that he was losing sight of his priorities, and the situation grew complicated. Helen, it turned out, wasn't as invested in him as he was in her. She had been drawn to the comfort of his company, but her intentions weren't as genuine as Arthur believed. In psychology, this type of behavior is referred to as sexual desire in later life, and while it's normal to want intimacy, it's also important to recognize when our desires can lead us astray. As we age, our emotional and physical needs are complex, and if we aren't careful, they can easily guide us down paths that aren't fulfilling or healthy. The saying, "late blooming winds are the scariest," holds here. In the rush of rekindling old desires, we might ignore our better judgment and lose ourselves in something that only seems to offer comfort. The key is finding a balance. Just because desires resurface doesn't mean they should take precedence over our personal values, well-being, and emotional health. If you're experiencing a similar longing, remember this. It's not about suppressing your feelings, but about recognizing them and understanding what they truly mean in the context of your life. Are you looking for genuine connection, or are you being swayed by a fleeting physical need? Take a moment to reflect and ensure that your desires don't overshadow your long-term happiness and peace of mind. Third, beware of the obsession to satisfy personal greed. There was a woman named Jessica in my old neighborhood who was known for her unshakable confidence. She would frequently boast, "I'm the best," as if she were trying to convince everyone, and maybe even herself, of her superiority. Her personality was magnetic, and at first, people admired her for it. When she started a romantic relationship with a man named Tom, she brought that same level of intensity into their dynamic. She expected Tom to meet all her needs and to constantly affirm her worth. She would tell him how things should be, how he should act, and what he should feel. Over time, her attitude of self-importance began to push him away. Tom, who initially tried to meet her demands, grew increasingly frustrated and disillusioned with the relationship. Jessica, too focused on fulfilling her desires and proving her self-worth, began to neglect the emotional balance of their partnership. She wanted everything to revolve around her, and when Tom couldn't meet her increasingly high expectations, he left. Jessica ended up alone, her obsession with her desires ultimately costing her the connection she had hoped to cultivate. This story serves as a powerful reminder. In relationships, an excessive focus on one's own needs can destroy mutual respect and trust. When you are constantly seeking to satisfy personal greed, whether emotional, material, or otherwise, it becomes a burden on both you and your partner. Relationships should be a balance of give and take, not a one-sided demand. True love requires understanding and compromise, not an unrelenting need to have your desires met at the expense of the other person's needs. Fourth, you must manage the desire to rely emotionally. As we age, loneliness can become a very real challenge. The absence of a spouse, children, or close friends can leave a deep emotional void. It's natural to seek comfort and companionship from a romantic partner, but when those feelings of emotional dependency become overwhelming, it can set up unrealistic expectations. Take the example of Linda, a 72-year-old widow who had always been fiercely independent. After the passing of her husband, she found herself craving emotional connection more than ever. She began dating John, a man she had met at a local community center, and quickly grew attached to him. At first, their relationship seemed to fill the void in her heart, but soon, Linda began relying too heavily on John for emotional support. Every time she felt lonely, she expected him to be there to lift her spirits. When John couldn't meet her expectations, or worse, when he was simply tired or preoccupied with his own life, Linda was deeply hurt. Instead of finding inner peace, she became disappointed and frustrated. She realized that her emotional needs were more than one person could handle, and it was affecting her sense of self-worth. What Linda needed was not someone else to fix her emotions, but to learn how to manage her feelings and find comfort within herself. Emotional dependence can lead to disappointment and strain the relationship, but emotional independence, on the other hand, allows us to maintain balance and peace. First, beware of con artists seeking money. There's a saying that goes, having money and love together is like walking a path in the early morning fog. Just when you think you can see the road ahead clearly, the fog thickens, making it impossible to tell whether someone's intentions are sincere or if there's something more hidden beneath the surface. In this video, We're going to dive into how love and money can sometimes be dangerously intertwined, especially when loneliness makes us more vulnerable than we realize. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment 1 below to let me know that you are still here with me. Take the story of Jim, a retired businessman in his late 70s who had spent a lifetime working hard to build his wealth. After raising his children and making sure they were taken care of, Jim found himself entering his senior years, increasingly feeling the weight of solitude. One day, a woman named Linda, charming, warm, and always ready with a smile, approached him at the local coffee shop. Her radiant personality reminded Jim of the days when his wife was still alive, and he couldn't help but feel drawn to her. She would visit him regularly, bringing him little gifts, listening to his stories, and showing concern for his well-being. Linda made Jim feel special, like someone who was valued, and before long, their bond grew stronger. After only a few months of spending time together, Linda suggested, "Jim, you've done so much in your life. Let me help you. I know shopping has become more difficult, and I can manage everything for you. Trust me with your bank account, and we can truly start a life together." In that moment, Jim remembered a verse his late father had once shared with him. "Stealing another's heart leads to losing your way." But Jim, lost in the warmth of Linda's affection and the attention he hadn't felt in years, decided to trust her. He handed over his bank account information, convinced that he had found love in his later years. But the next morning, Linda was gone, along with everything in his bank account. Alone in his home, Jim sat there in disbelief, his mind racing. He remembered his father's words and the saying, "Too much is as bad as too little." Jim had let his emotions guide him, and in doing so, he allowed his loneliness to cloud his judgment. He could have lived comfortably, content with his savings, but in his desperation for companionship, he had lost everything. Jim's story is a tragic example of what psychologists call emotional predators. These individuals target the emotional vulnerabilities of others, manipulating their desires and insecurities to get what they want. And once they've taken what they need, they vanish without a trace, leaving behind nothing but broken trust and regret. Ellen DeGeneres, a famous American TV host, once said, "We sometimes learn the most when we are at our weakest." Jim's suffering, although painful, could teach us all valuable lessons about protecting ourselves from those who prey on our emotions. One day, during a family gathering, Jim's daughter asked her father, "Dad, why did Grandpa trust her so easily?" In response, Jim simply replied, "Everyone wants love, but you have to have the wisdom to recognize when it's real." His daughter, although young, nodded thoughtfully. Jim's reflection echoed a sentiment shared by Buddhist scriptures. Love without wisdom is helplessness, and wisdom without love is coldness. Finding a balance between the two is the true task of life. This brings me to a question for you. Which is more important, money or love? Or is there something deeper we need in our lives that transcends both? Take a moment to reflect on this. It's natural to seek companionship as we age, but it's just as important to maintain a sense of self and protect what's truly yours. Don't allow your emotional needs to overwhelm your better judgment. Whether it's money or love, neither should consume you or define your worth. The key phrase to keep in mind today is, love wisely. Try saying it with me. I respect myself, recognize the value of love, and make wise choices. Finally, before he passed away, legendary rock singer Freddie Mercury shared one simple yet profound thought. Love is everything we have. Everything else is just a small part of the world. As we journey through life, especially in our later years, it's crucial to cherish the true love that nurtures us and helps us grow, not the fleeting moments that can lead us astray. Second, it's easy to be swayed by physical greed in old age. There's an old saying, a strong flame consumes itself with its heat. Desire, much like a fire, can ignite suddenly and burn brightly. But as we grow older, that flame can sometimes get out of control, fueled by loneliness and longing for connection. In our youth, we may have learned to manage desire, but in our later years, emotions and needs can sometimes become overwhelming, leading us down paths we wouldn't normally take. If not carefully controlled, the fire of desire can burn everything away, leaving only regret. Take the story of Helen, a woman in her early 80s who was beloved in her small town for her vibrant personality and active involvement in the community. Everyone admired her energy and spirit, even though she had outlived most of her friends. But one day, Helen came to a neighborhood gathering looking more radiant than usual. She had on a new, expensive dress and a bright smile that caught everyone's attention. At first, people were puzzled, but they didn't ask too many questions. As time went on, Helen began spending a lot of time with a younger man, Tom, whom she had met at a local cafe. The rumors started to circulate. People whispered that perhaps she was just looking for someone to fill the emptiness left by the years. Some jokingly said, "Late-blooming winds are the scariest," referring to how love in old age can sometimes be more of a risk than a blessing. But Helen refused to listen to the gossip, loudly proclaiming, "There's no age limit on love." She convinced herself that she had finally found someone who made her feel young again. However, things took a turn. After a few months, the relationship that had felt so promising became a painful lesson. Tom, once attentive and charming, began to show his true colors. He gradually distanced himself, and eventually, Helen realized that the money she had once freely offered him had disappeared as well. Heartbroken and alone, she found herself in the space she had hoped to avoid. She recalled a verse from the Buddhist scriptures that echoed in her mind. Desire is like a burning arrow. Behind the fleeting joy lies deep pain. Desire gives temporary sweetness, but its end always returns to emptiness. Psychologists often note that as we age, our physical needs may change, but emotional needs do not diminish. The loneliness that many elderly people face can spark desires that they may not know how to manage. And if those desires are not kept in check, they can lead us astray, causing us to lose our sense of self. In a classic text, the Mayong Sim Bogam, it is said, "If you do not control your greed, you cannot attain peace of mind." This ancient wisdom holds even today, especially in an age when many of us are seeking something to fill the emotional void that aging can bring. Consider the life of Elvis Presley, who openly admitted to struggling with the emptiness that fame and success could not fill. He once said, "I tried to fill the emptiness inside me with something else, but in the end, I almost lost myself." Despite having everything anyone could want, Elvis was haunted by desires he couldn't control. It's a powerful reminder that desires, if unchecked, can never truly satisfy the deeper needs of the heart. One day, during a family gathering, my uncle shared a story that stuck with me. He said, "When I was younger, I met someone when I was feeling more excited, more alive. But that person wasn't interested in me. They were more interested in what I could provide." My uncle's face turned somber as he recalled the lesson learned. Sometimes, he added, people are driven by desires that overshadow everything else. The reality is that unchecked desires can drive people to make decisions that lead to pain, especially when they aren't rooted in true connection. As Buddhist teachings remind us, he who guards his heart is the true victor. The goal in life isn't to suppress our desires but to find balance and understanding. If you are able to manage your desires and protect your emotional well-being, you'll find true peace. A practical way to approach this is simple. Be mindful of your desires and how they guide your actions. Observe your feelings and check if they're coming from a place of true connection or fleeting wants. The key phrase to remember today is, I control my desires and wisely protect my life. Take a moment to reflect on this and try saying it with me. I manage my desires wisely and do not lose myself. Finally, a quote from the legendary Michael Jackson reminds us of the importance of self-awareness. If you don't change the person in the mirror, you cannot change the world. It's a call to look inward, to simplify, and to let go of unnecessary desires that cloud our true selves. In our later years, we are given the gift of clarity, a chance to shed the distractions and find peace by focusing on what truly matters. Third, beware of the obsession to satisfy personal greed. Do you know that when personal greed becomes too large, it has the potential to consume you entirely? Greed is like an endlessly empty well. No matter how much you try to fill it, it always remains empty. The more you try to satisfy it, the deeper and darker the space becomes. Similarly, greed leads to obsession, and obsession eventually erodes a person from the inside out. Take the story of Laura, a woman in her late 60s, who was known in her community for her unwavering confidence and pride. She often boasted, "I'm the best," as though to affirm her self-worth to others, and perhaps to herself as well. While this self-assurance made her appear strong, it also pushed people away. Over time, Laura's relationships became more about proving her superiority than connecting on a deeper level. When she met Dan, a man in his 50s, she immediately started to impose her standards on him. She expected him to align with her every view, her every need. His actions, his words, and even his emotions were measured by her high expectations. But as time passed, Dan grew weary of trying to meet her impossible standards. The more Laura demanded, the more he pulled away. Eventually, Dan left, unable to bear the constant pressure. Laura, feeling abandoned and lonely, was forced to confront the painful truth. Her obsession with proving she was the best had cost her a loving relationship. Alone and reflecting on her choices, Laura remembered a verse from the Buddhist scriptures that resonated deeply with her. Obsession is the root of suffering, and greed gnaws at the heart. Psychologists refer to this behavior as narcissistic personality, where excessive self-love leads to a lack of empathy for others. When you are overly focused on yourself, your relationships become imbalanced. It's like a tug of war. If one side pulls too hard, the other side struggles to let go, eventually breaking the connection. Laura's story is a poignant reminder that when we allow greed and obsession to control our relationships, we risk pushing away the very people we care about most. The Mayong Sim Bogam, an ancient text on personal wisdom, says, "Excessive desire brings anger. Greed disrupts balance and creates need in relationships." This idea is echoed in many cultures and philosophies, and it highlights how unchecked desires, whether for attention, validation, or control, can destabilize any connection. Think of the famous novel Hong Gil Dong, where the protagonist's brothers become so obsessed with their father's love and the family reputation that they end up losing their brotherly bond and entangling themselves in their greed. Greed has the power to destroy not just relationships, but also our peace of mind and happiness. One day, during a family gathering, my uncle shared a story that stuck with me. My younger uncle, always the self-proclaimed best businessman, would often boast about his success and try to teach everyone around him the secrets to his wealth. One day, he stood up at a family dinner and loudly declared, "I'm the best." My older uncle, a more reserved and thoughtful man, simply smiled and said, "You don't need to shout it. We all know." The room erupted in laughter, but for a brief moment, I saw the bitterness in my younger uncle's eyes. He craved recognition, but when his need for validation turned into an obsession, it created distance between him and everyone else. This moment made me reflect on a core truth. When we let greed and obsession drive our behavior, we push others away, often without even realizing it. The scriptures also teach, to empty is to be filled. Only by letting go of obsession and greed can we make room for meaningful relationships and peace of mind. What role does greed play in your life? How can you maintain harmony in your relationships without letting obsession control you? The most effective way to move forward is simple. Let go of your greed and find balance in your relationships. By shifting your focus from elevating yourself to understanding and empathizing with others, you can create a more balanced, fulfilling connection. The phrase to carry with you today is, let go of greed and embrace people. I encourage you to commit to this mindset today. Try saying it with me. I let go of my greed and maintain a balance between myself and others. Finally, a powerful quote from legendary singer Michael Jackson reminds us of the importance of self-reflection. If you don't change the person in the mirror, you cannot change the world. In our lives, the journey to self-improvement starts with looking inward, letting go of our need for validation, and finding true peace within. Fourth, you must manage the desire to rely emotionally. Imagine a person's heart as a boat floating on water. When the boat is steady, it drifts peacefully along the surface. But if a heavy burden shifts to one side, the boat becomes unbalanced and can easily capsize. As we age, loneliness can be like powerful waves crashing against that boat, making it increasingly difficult to maintain emotional balance. It's only natural to want to rely on someone emotionally, to seek comfort in the presence of another. But when those emotional needs aren't met, the disappointment can create even bigger waves of isolation. Take the story of Susan, a woman in her 70s, who was once known for her vivacious personality and her ability to light up a room. Over the years, however, her relationship with her husband, George, had become quieter. As their conversations dwindled and the emptiness grew, Susan began to feel more isolated than ever. The loneliness became unbearable, so she turned to the people around her for emotional support. She began spending more time with Tom, a man she met at the local senior center. At first, he offered a listening ear, and Susan found comfort in his company, leaning on him for the emotional connection she was craving. But soon, Tom's attitude began to change. He became distant, and the support that once felt so comforting was no longer there when she needed it most. Susan realized, too late, that she had placed her emotional well-being in the hands of someone who couldn't truly offer her what she sought. In that moment of deep disappointment, she recalled a verse from the Buddhist scriptures that had always resonated with her. Those who rely on others will never find their path. In the end, Susan understood that the key to overcoming loneliness was not to depend on others, but to learn how to manage her emotions on her own. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment 2 below to let me know that you are still here with me. Psychologists refer to the human desire for emotional security as attachment, which is a fundamental need in relationships. Attachment allows us to feel connected and supported, which is vital for mental well-being. However, when attachment becomes excessive, it can disrupt our emotional balance. The Mayong Sim Bogam, a classic text on wisdom, teaches, "Those who rely on others are anxious, and those who are independent are peaceful." The true strength comes not from depending on someone else to fill the gaps, but from finding the ability to cope with loneliness through inner peace and self-reliance. This concept of emotional independence is beautifully symbolized in the classic novel The Old Man and the Sea, where the protagonist, Santiago, faces the challenge of capturing a giant marlin alone in the sea. His struggle, which may seem like a battle against the fish, is also a struggle against his loneliness. Through this solitude, he discovers his true strength and resilience. Santiago's story illustrates the power of finding inner strength and balance when faced with emotional isolation. One day, during a family gathering, my older brother shared a piece of advice that stuck with me. When you're feeling lonely, it's better to find your own heart than to search for it in others. His words felt profound, especially when my younger nephew asked, "Why shouldn't we trust people?" My older brother replied quietly, "The center of trust should always be yourself." This idea is reflected in the concept of Juknyang Yadong, which means study by day, work by night, but also suggests controlling one's efforts and will to stay centered in life. So, I ask you, can you rely on yourself? When you feel the urge to lean on someone, can you ensure that you don't lose your emotional center in the process? Today, take a moment to reflect on this. The most effective way to protect yourself is simple. Control your mind and emotions. Even when loneliness knocks at your door, find your balance and inner peace. The phrase I encourage you to engrave in your heart today is, "I believe in myself and find peace within." Try saying it with me. I do not rely on others, and I manage my own heart. Lastly, I want to share a powerful quote from legendary singer Beyoncé. "If you don't love yourself, no one else will love you." This reminds us that true emotional strength comes from within. To truly care for and love others, we must first nurture and love ourselves. Through today's reflection, I hope you found some time to think about how to manage your emotional needs and overcome loneliness on your own. We all can maintain the center of our hearts and find peace through our strength. May you embrace your inner power, especially in those moments when loneliness tries to creep in. First, beware of con artists seeking money. Romantic relationships can make your heart flutter, especially in later years when the idea of companionship feels like a breath of fresh air. But sometimes, the scent of money can make your heart race even more. In one case, a man named Robert, a retired engineer in his late 70s, had spent his life building a comfortable nest egg. After his wife passed, he found himself lonely and eager for companionship. One day, a woman named Carla entered his life. She was warm, charming, and always there when he needed someone to talk to. Within just a few months of meeting, she expressed her love for him, and before he knew it, Robert felt deeply connected to her. Carla convinced Robert that their love should be shared completely, even suggesting that they merge their finances to start a new chapter together. "Love is about sharing," she told him with a sweet smile, just as they'd been enjoying their time together. Robert, caught up in the excitement of finding love again, agreed to give her access to his bank account, believing she had his best interests at heart. But the very next day, Carla was gone, along with all of Robert's savings. When Robert realized what had happened, he felt betrayed and heartbroken. He remembered his late father's advice: "Never let your heart be too easily won, or it may cost you everything." In the end, Robert learned the painful lesson that not all love is genuine. While romantic relationships can be fulfilling, we must always be cautious about opening up to people who may only be seeking to exploit our vulnerabilities. Second, it's easy to be swayed by physical greed in old age. There's a saying, "Love knows no age," and while that's true, it's also important to acknowledge that as we age, our physical desires can sometimes become more pronounced. Our hormones and emotional needs don't necessarily fade as we get older. Sometimes these desires can emerge unexpectedly, like a late-blooming flower. However, when physical attraction or desire becomes the driving force behind a relationship, it can cloud our judgment and lead us down paths that aren't healthy. Take the case of Margaret, an active woman in her early 80s, who was well known for her vibrant personality. After losing her husband, she began spending more time with Greg, a man she met at a local community event. Initially, their connection seemed innocent enough, but as time went on, Margaret found herself drawn to Greg in ways she hadn't anticipated. His charm and attentiveness sparked a renewed sense of attraction in her, and she began to ignore the warning signs. Greg was much younger than Margaret, and while he seemed to enjoy her company, he also made it clear that he was interested in the material benefits of the relationship. Eventually, Margaret realized that her emotions and physical attraction to Greg had overshadowed her ability to think clearly. The relationship ended badly, and she was left feeling used and empty. Margaret learned the hard way that being swayed by physical desires alone can easily lead to losing yourself in a relationship that isn't truly built on mutual respect and love. Third, beware of the obsession to satisfy personal greed. In relationships, it's easy to let personal desires and ambitions cloud our ability to truly connect with others. Take the story of Jessica, a woman in her 60s who was always confident, sometimes to a fault. She was known for saying, "I'm the best," and for insisting that everything in her life, including her relationships, had to align with her standards. When she met Mark, a man who seemed to admire her assertiveness, Jessica thought she had found the perfect match. However, as their relationship progressed, Jessica's obsession with being the best began to create tension. She expected Mark to live up to her ideals, validate her every move, and make her feel superior at all times. Her need for control and recognition only grew, and soon, Mark began to withdraw. Eventually, he left, unable to live up to her constant demands. Jessica was left alone, frustrated, and regretful. It wasn't until she reflected on her actions that she realized her obsession with personal greed had ruined a relationship that could have been fulfilling. Excessive obsession with one's desires, whether it's the need for attention, control, or validation, can drive others away. True love doesn't come from trying to impose your own will on someone else. Rather, it comes from mutual understanding, respect, and compromise. Fourth, you must manage the desire to rely emotionally. As we age, loneliness becomes a very real challenge. It's only natural to want to rely on someone emotionally for comfort and companionship. However, when we place too much reliance on another person to fulfill our emotional needs, we set ourselves up for disappointment. Often, our expectations can become too heavy for our partners to bear, especially if they cannot meet all of our needs. Consider the example of Barbara, a woman in her late 70s who had always been independent but found herself struggling with deep feelings of loneliness after her children moved away. She began seeking emotional comfort from John, a friend she'd known for years. At first, John was happy to support her, but over time, Barbara's emotional dependence grew. She relied on him for daily reassurance and validation, and when John was unable to meet those expectations, Barbara became disillusioned and disappointed. Eventually, Barbara realized that she needed to find a way to manage her emotions on her own. She came to understand that relying too heavily on others for emotional fulfillment could only lead to frustration, and that true peace came from finding emotional independence. The lesson she learned is one we can all apply. Managing loneliness and emotional dependence requires self-awareness and personal growth. First, beware of con artists seeking money. There's a saying, having money and love together is like walking a path in the early morning fog. Just when you think you can see the road clearly, the fog thickens, making it impossible to distinguish between genuine affection and ulterior motives. Love can be a powerful force in our lives, but it's crucial to be aware of how some people may use it as a tool to manipulate others. Let's explore the hidden scent of money in love and how it can cloud our judgment. Take the story of George, a man in his 80s who had worked hard his entire life and built a comfortable retirement. After seeing his children settle into their own lives, George began to feel a deep sense of loneliness. One day, a woman named Elizabeth, much younger and full of charm, entered his life. She was warm, kind, and attentive, and George quickly grew fond of her. He felt like someone was finally caring for him again, and Elizabeth's affection seemed genuine. After a few months, Elizabeth made a suggestion that would forever change George's life. She said, "How about we truly become one? You're having trouble with shopping, right? I'll help you with everything. Trust me with your bank account, and I'll take care of everything for us." The warmth of her smile, coupled with her constant kindness, made it hard for George to resist. He remembered a verse from a book his father had read to him growing up: "Stealing another's heart leads to losing one's way." But in that moment, with his loneliness weighing so heavily, George was swayed. He handed over his bank account to her, trusting her completely. The next day, Elizabeth disappeared without a trace. George sat in his empty home, realizing that his trust had been misplaced. He remembered another saying, "Too much is as bad as too little." In the case of love and money, too much trust and too many emotions can easily lead to regret. By the time George realized the mistake he had made, it was too late. He could have lived comfortably without the worries of financial insecurity, but in his desperation for companionship, he let his guard down and lost everything. Psychologists often refer to people who exploit the loneliness of others as emotional predators. These individuals prey on the emotional vulnerabilities of others, manipulating feelings and extracting what they want before disappearing. Ellen DeGeneres, the renowned TV host, once said, "We sometimes learn the most when we are at our weakest. Indeed, it's often through pain and suffering that we gain wisdom. The trick is to learn from our experiences, so we don't fall into the same trap again." One day, during a family gathering, George's daughter, Sarah, asked her father, "Dad, why did you let her in? Why did you trust her so easily?" George's reply was calm but full of insight. "Everyone wants love, Sarah, but love must be paired with wisdom. You can't just let your heart lead you blindly. You must have wisdom to guide it." He had learned the hard way that love without wisdom can lead to heartbreak, and wisdom without love can feel cold and empty. In Buddhist philosophy, there's a saying, "Love without wisdom is helplessness, and wisdom without love is coldness." Finding a balance between the two is the true task of life. This idea speaks to the need for both compassion and discernment in relationships. Now, I pose a question to you. Which is more important, money or love? Or perhaps, what is truly necessary in our lives if it's neither of these? Today, reflect on how you approach relationships and the way you balance emotional needs with practicality. While forming romantic connections can help fill the void of loneliness, it's more important to not lose yourself in the process. Knowing your value and protecting your emotional well-being is key. Whether it's love or money, don't let it consume you. Protect your boundaries and maintain your sense of self. The phrase I encourage you to carry with you today is, "Love wisely." Commit to this for today. Try saying it with me. I respect myself, recognize the value of love, and make wise choices. Finally, legendary rock singer Freddie Mercury left us with these powerful words before he passed away. "Love is everything we have. Everything else is just a small part of the world." In our lives, it's vital to preserve the true, authentic love that nurtures our hearts and helps us grow, while protecting ourselves from being manipulated by the false promises that may appear on the road ahead. Third, beware of the obsession to satisfy personal greed. Have you ever realized that personal greed, if left unchecked, can consume you? Greed is like a bottomless well. No matter how much you try to fill it, it remains empty. The more you pour in, the deeper and darker the void becomes. Similarly, when greed takes root in our hearts, it leads to an unhealthy obsession, and that obsession can slowly erode everything else in our lives. Take the story of Amanda, a woman in her early 60s, who was always the center of attention in her social circle. She was full of self-confidence, often proclaiming, "I'm the best," and walking through life with an air of pride. However, her assertiveness, while admirable to some, started to push people away. She had high standards for herself, and even higher standards for the people around her. When she met Steve, a man she was drawn to, she didn't just love him, she imposed her expectations on him. His every word, his actions, and even his feelings had to align with what Amanda deemed acceptable. At first, Steve tried to meet her demands, hoping that he could live up to her expectations. But over time, the pressure grew unbearable. He began to feel like he was losing his own identity, trying too hard to match Amanda's view of the world. Eventually, Steve walked away from the relationship, leaving Amanda alone, devastated, and confused. Only after the breakup did Amanda reflect on her behavior and remember a lesson she had learned many years ago from Buddhist teachings. Obsession is the root of suffering, and greed gnaws at the heart. She realized that in her quest to satisfy her own needs, she had lost sight of the needs of others. Psychologists would call Amanda's behavior narcissistic, an overinflated sense of self, which caused her to become unable to consider anyone else's feelings. In relationships, this kind of excessive self-love can destabilize everything. Relationships are like a tug of war. If one side pulls too hard, the other side will either break or be forced to let go. The Mayong Sim Bogam, an ancient text on wisdom, teaches that excessive desire brings anger. Greed disrupts balance and creates need in relationships. This wisdom can be found not only in ancient texts but also in classic literature, such as the famous Korean novel Hong Gil-dong. The story of Hong Gil-dong's brothers is a powerful reminder of how obsession can tear apart family bonds. Their obsession with their father's love and their family's reputation led to jealousy, division, and ultimately a tragic breakdown of their relationship. Greed and obsession have the power to destroy our connections to those we care about most. During a family reunion one weekend, my uncle, Henry, shared a personal story. His younger brother, Frank, was always boasting about how successful he was in business. He would frequently tell the family, "I'm the best businessman you'll ever know." At one point, Frank stood up at the dinner table and loudly proclaimed, "I'm the best," as if trying to assert his superiority. My older uncle, Paul, who had seen this behavior time and time again, quietly responded, "You don't have to shout it, Frank. Everyone already knows." The room erupted in laughter, but Frank's face suddenly darkened with a touch of bitterness. His need for constant validation, his obsession with proving himself, had pushed everyone away. The truth is, we all want recognition. But when that desire for recognition turns into obsession, it can lead to isolation. Scriptures and ancient wisdom consistently emphasize this truth. To empty is to be filled. Only when we let go of obsession and greed can we create meaningful, balanced relationships. The real question is, how much room does greed take up in your life? How can you find balance in your relationships without being consumed by the need for recognition or control? Use today's meditation to reflect on this. The most effective way to change is simple. Let go of your greed and cultivate balance in your relationships. The first step is to stop obsessing over elevating yourself and, instead, learn to empathize with others. This is how we build healthier, more fulfilling relationships. The phrase I encourage you to engrave in your heart today is, "Let go of greed and embrace people." Try saying it with me. I let go of my greed and maintain a balance between myself and others. Finally, I leave you with a powerful quote from the legendary musician Michael Jackson. If you don't change the person in the mirror, you cannot change the world. In our lives, true transformation begins by letting go of our obsession with greed and control, and starting with the person we see in the mirror. Fourth, you must manage the desire to rely emotionally. Have you ever noticed how a person's heart is like a boat floating on water? When it's still, the boat drifts peacefully along, but when a heavy burden leans to one side, it tips over easily. As we grow older, loneliness often becomes like waves crashing against that boat, making it increasingly difficult to maintain balance. It's natural to want to rely on someone emotionally, but what happens when that person can't meet your expectations? The disappointment that follows can feel like an even bigger storm. Take the story of Linda, a woman in her late 70s, who was always known for her vibrant spirit and outgoing personality. She was beloved by everyone in her neighborhood, always quick to lend a hand and share a laugh. However, as time passed, her marriage to George began to lose its spark, and their once lively conversations faded into silence. With each passing day, Linda found herself feeling more isolated and yearning for someone to fill the emotional void left by her husband's indifference. As loneliness crept in, Linda sought solace in the company of others. One day, she formed a close bond with a man named Jack, a neighbor who was kind and attentive. She began to rely on him emotionally, confiding in him about her struggles and hoping that he would provide the comfort and connection she needed. But as time went on, Jack's attention began to wane. He wasn't there when she needed him most, and Linda's emotional reliance on him only deepened her disappointment. In that moment of realization, Linda remembered a verse from a book her mother had once shared with her. Those who rely on others will never find their path. This wisdom helped her understand that, in her search for emotional support, she had lost sight of her inner strength. Ultimately, Linda had to learn to manage her own heart and stop relying so heavily on others for emotional fulfillment. In psychology, The desire to find security in relationships is known as attachment. While attachment is essential for maintaining healthy connections, excessive attachment can throw off your own balance. The Mayong Sim Bogam, an ancient philosophical text, reminds us, those who rely on others are anxious, and those who are independent are peaceful. The key to emotional well-being lies in learning to control your mind and finding peace within, especially when you are alone. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment 3 below to let me know that you are still here with me. This idea reminds me of the classic novel The Old Man and the Sea, where the protagonist, Santiago, is alone at sea, battling a giant marlin. In his isolation, he discovers his true strength. Santiago's solitary battle represents the inner resilience we all can cultivate, even in our loneliest moments. I recall something my older brother once told me. When you're lonely, it's better to find your own heart than to seek out others. His words have always stayed with me. At a recent family gathering, my nephew asked, "Why do people place so much trust in others?" My older brother responded, "The center of that trust should be yourself." In life, we often look to others for validation or emotional security, but true peace begins with trusting ourselves first. Can you rely on yourself? When you feel the need to depend on someone, can you ensure that it doesn't shake your inner balance? Use today's meditation to reflect on this. Before you rely on others for emotional support, focus on managing your own heart. The most effective way is simple. Control your mind and maintain your center. Even when loneliness hits, you can still find strength within yourself. The phrase I want you to carry with you today is, "I believe in myself and find peace within." Try saying it with me. I do not rely on others and manage my own heart. Finally, legendary singer Beyoncé once said, "If you don't love yourself, no one else will love you." This powerful message emphasizes that self-love and willpower must come from within. Only when we are at peace with ourselves can we form meaningful relationships with others. Through today's story, I hope you've had a moment to reflect on how to manage the desire to rely on someone emotionally and how to overcome loneliness on your own. We all have the power to center ourselves and find peace through our inner strength. I encourage you to believe in your ability to protect and nurture yourself, especially during those lonely moments. Have you ever thought about how a person's heart is like a boat floating on water? When it remains still, it gently drifts along, but when a heavy weight shifts to one side, it becomes unbalanced and easily tips over. As we grow older, loneliness often becomes like the waves crashing against the boat, making it harder and harder to keep steady. It's natural to want to rely on someone emotionally, especially when facing the solitude that comes with aging. But what happens when those emotional needs aren't met? The disappointment can feel like an even bigger wave. Take the example of Linda, an elderly woman in her early 80s who had always been known for her bright, bubbly personality and kindness. She was the heart of her community, always ready to lend an ear or a hand to anyone in need. But over time, her marriage to Tom had become increasingly quiet and distant. Linda began feeling the weight of loneliness growing heavier with each passing day, and she found herself reaching out more to others, seeking comfort in their company. One day, Linda became especially close to Bob, a man in her neighborhood who seemed to fill the void she felt. She began leaning on him emotionally, telling him her deepest feelings and hopes. But as time passed, Bob's responses grew less frequent, and when she needed him the most, he wasn't there. That's when Linda remembered something her mother had always said: "Those who rely on others will never find their path." It was a hard lesson, but Linda realized that by depending on Bob to fill her emotional gaps, she had neglected her ability to find peace within. In psychology, the need for emotional security in relationships is referred to as attachment. While a certain degree of attachment is necessary for healthy connections, too much attachment can disrupt your emotional balance. There's wisdom in the idea that those who rely on others are anxious, and those who are independent are peaceful. This truth suggests that the key to emotional well-being comes from learning to look inward and manage loneliness on your own. This concept reminds me of the classic novel The Old Man and the Sea, where Santiago, the protagonist, battles alone in the vast ocean. His solitary struggle symbolizes the inner strength we all have within us, even in the most difficult of times. I recall a conversation with my older brother where he shared a piece of wisdom. When you're lonely, it's better to find peace within yourself than to search for it in others. Those words have always stayed with me. During a family gathering, my nephew asked, Why do people place so much trust in others? My older brother quietly answered, the center of that trust should be yourself. This is a reminder that we must cultivate self-trust first and foremost. Can you rely on yourself? When you find yourself wanting to depend on someone else, can you ensure that it doesn't shift your inner foundation? Use today's meditation to reflect on this. Before seeking emotional support from others, learn to manage your own heart. The most effective way to do so is simple. Control your mind and stay grounded. Even in times of loneliness, find your peace from within. The phrase I encourage you to keep in your heart today is, I believe in myself and find peace within. Let's say it together. I do not rely on others and manage my own heart. Finally, let's remember what legendary singer Beyoncé once said, if you don't love yourself, no one else will. This powerful message teaches us that true willpower and love must start from within ourselves. Only then can we build relationships that are fulfilling and balanced. Through today's story, I hope you've had some time to think about how to manage the desire to emotionally depend on others and how to overcome loneliness on your own. We all have the ability to center ourselves and find peace through our inner strength. May you believe in your ability to protect and nurture yourself, even when loneliness creeps in. The dangers of physical greed in old age. As time went by, Linda spent more time with Bob, and her demeanor began to change. She became more animated and outspoken, drawing attention to their budding friendship. At first, people seemed to notice, but as her connection with Bob deepened, the whispers of concern started. Some of the neighbors joked, saying, late romances are risky, aren't they? But Linda brushed off the rumors with a smile, insisting that there was no age limit on love. However, the situation took a turn when Bob, who had once showered her with attention, suddenly disappeared with some of Linda's valuables. She was left in disbelief, forced to confront a painful truth. Her longing for love and companionship had blinded her to the possible risks. Linda recalled a passage from a book her grandmother used to read to her. Desire is like a burning arrow. Behind the fleeting joy lies deep wounds. Desire offers a temporary sweetness, but its end always returns to emptiness. Psychologists tell us that as people age, their physical needs might change, but emotional needs, such as the longing for love and connection, remain just as powerful. Unfortunately, loneliness can sometimes fuel a desire for physical connection that clouds our judgment. If not properly managed, these desires can lead to poor decisions and personal loss. In the Myeong Sim Bogam, an ancient Korean text, it's written, if you do not control your greed, you will not find peace. This timeless advice remains relevant today. We've all heard stories about people who attempt to fill their emotional emptiness with material things or fleeting pleasures, only to end up feeling more lost. Elvis Presley once shared his struggle. I tried to fill my emptiness with something else, but in the end, I almost lost myself. Despite his fame, wealth, and success, his inner thirst remained unquenched. One evening, during a family gathering, my uncle shared his experience. I once met someone who seemed full of excitement and youthful energy. But it turned out, they were more interested in my wallet than my company. Everyone chuckled, but there was a bittersweetness in my uncle's eyes. The lesson here is clear. If we don't manage our desires, they will control us. The Buddhist scriptures remind us, those who guard their hearts are the true victors. This is the key to emotional and relational balance. Understanding the limits of our desires and finding peace within ourselves. Let me suggest one practical method for you. Manage your desires and protect your peace of mind. Take a moment to observe your heart and avoid being drawn into unhealthy desires. True inner peace comes from finding balance within yourself. Here's a phrase to engrave in your heart today. I manage my desires and wisely protect my life. Try saying it with me. I manage my desires wisely and do not lose myself. Lastly, remember what Steve Jobs, the founder of Apple, once said, simple can be harder than complex. You have to work hard to get your thinking clean to make it simple. It's important to let go of complicated desires and return to simplicity to find your true self. Have you ever thought about how greed can impact your life and your relationships? Greed is like a storm that can cloud your judgment and distort your perception of others. It makes us focus on what we can gain rather than the joy of giving or the beauty of shared experiences. As you reflect today, consider this. How can you create relationships that are built on mutual respect and understanding, free from the chains of excessive greed? The most effective and simple way to practice this is to let go of your greed and learn how to balance your needs with the needs of others. Discard the obsession with elevating yourself too much and make an effort to understand the hearts of others. This is the first step in building healthy, balanced relationships. The phrase I suggest you engrave in your heart today is, "Let go of greed and embrace others." How about making this your pledge today? Say it with me. I let go of my greed and maintain a balance between myself and others. Finally, let's remember a powerful quote from the legendary Michael Jackson. If you don't change the person in the mirror, you cannot change the world. This reminds us that true change starts from within. To cultivate meaningful relationships and personal growth, we must first release our attachment to greed and start reflecting on our hearts. Fourth, manage the desire to emotionally depend on others well. Do you know that a person's heart is like a boat floating on water? If it remains still, it drifts gently along, but if a heavy burden shifts to one side, the boat will tip over. As we age, loneliness can be like waves that hit the boat, making it hard to maintain balance. It's natural to want to emotionally depend on someone else, especially as we face the challenges of aging. But what happens when those expectations aren't met? The waves of disappointment can become even bigger and harder to navigate. Let's take the story of Sarah, a woman in her late 70s, as an example. Sarah was beloved in her neighborhood, always known for her vibrant personality and kindness. However, after a difficult separation from her longtime partner, she began to feel increasingly alone. She turned to those around her for emotional support, and over time, she grew especially close to a man from the local community, seeking comfort in his companionship. But as time went on, his support began to dwindle. Sarah was there for him in times of need, but when she needed him the most, he wasn't there. It was at this moment that Sarah remembered a lesson from her childhood, something her mother had taught her. Those who rely on others will never find their path. She realized that her emotional dependence had led her astray, and she needed to regain control of her emotional well-being. In psychology, this need for emotional security in relationships is called attachment. While healthy attachment is essential to human relationships, excessive attachment can disrupt your emotional balance. The Mayong Simbagam says, "Those who rely on others are anxious, and those who are independent are peaceful." This ancient wisdom teaches us that the true path to emotional well-being lies in cultivating independence and inner peace, especially in the face of loneliness. This reminds me of the classic novel The Old Man and the Sea by Ernest Hemingway. The protagonist, Santiago, battles alone in the vast sea, struggling against the mighty marlin. Through his isolation, he discovers his true self and inner strength. His solitary fight symbolizes the resilience we should strive for within ourselves, even when facing adversity. I remember a conversation with my uncle during a family gathering. He shared, "If you're lonely, it's better to find your own heart than to search for it in someone else." His words struck a deep chord with me. Later, my nephew asked, "Why did Grandpa trust people so easily?" My father responded quietly, "The core of that trust should always be in yourself. Just as the saying goes, study by day, work by night. It also implies that we should manage our efforts and will carefully." Can you rely on yourself? When you feel the urge to depend on someone else, can you ensure that your emotional center remains intact? Use today's meditation to reflect on this. How can you manage your heart and emotions before turning to others for support? The most effective way to do so is simple. Control your own heart and maintain your center. Even in loneliness, find solace within yourself and keep your emotional balance. The phrase I encourage you to engrave in your heart today is, "I believe in myself and find peace within me." Let's say it together. I do not rely on others and control my own heart. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment below to let me know that you are still here with me. Finally, a quote from Beyoncé reminds us, "If you don't love yourself, no one else will." In our lives, true strength comes from within. When we learn to love and trust ourselves, we can create balanced, healthy relationships with others. First, beware of gold-digging scammers. The term flower snake is often used to describe those who deceive others for financial gain. In romantic relationships, the idea of love can make your heart race, but sometimes the scent of money makes it race even faster. There's an old story of a grandfather who, after only a few months of meeting a new lover, entrusted his bankbook to her, saying, "Love is about sharing." But in the end, Both his love and his bank book were gone. This serves as a cautionary tale. In our later years, we must be extra careful about those who might prey on our loneliness, taking advantage of our emotional vulnerabilities for financial gain. Second, easily swayed by physical greed at older ages. There's a saying, love knows no age, but as we grow older, our emotions and desires can become complicated by physical changes. Hormones that once surged with youth may now feel like quirky jokes, causing us to laugh nervously or find attraction in unexpected places. While it's natural to seek companionship, being too swayed by physical desires can easily lead to losing oneself. There's wisdom in the saying, late romances are the scariest, because, in later years, emotional and physical desires can cloud our judgment. Let's remember that true love is built on mutual respect, not just physical attraction. Third, beware of the obsession to fulfill your greed. There was a woman in the neighborhood who was always proud, saying, "I'm the best." Her confidence was admirable, but her attitude towards others, including her lover, was one of dominance and control. She insisted that everything, from his actions to his emotions, align with her standards. Eventually, her lover grew tired of this and left her. In relationships, focusing only on fulfilling your desires and needs can easily push the other person away. Obsessive self-centeredness isn't love. It's a burden. Remember, love is about balance, respect, and mutual care, not about satisfying our own selfish needs. Fourth, manage the desire to emotionally depend on others well. As we age, loneliness can become more prominent, and it's natural to seek emotional support from a partner. However, if we place too much emotional reliance on others, especially if they are unable to meet our expectations, it can lead to disappointment and frustration. In these moments, it's important to first manage our own emotions and learn to find contentment and peace within ourselves. Relying too heavily on others for emotional fulfillment can destabilize not just your relationship, but your inner peace. Strength comes from the ability to be emotionally independent, to find joy in your own company, and to build relationships based on mutual support, not dependency. First, beware of gold-digging scammers. Do you know the saying, having both money and love is like walking a path in the early morning fog? It's like walking down a path that seems clear, only for the fog to thicken with every step you take, making it impossible to tell if someone's intentions are genuine or if there's something hidden beneath the surface. Today, let's talk about the scent of money entwined with love. In our neighborhood, there was an elderly man named Mr. Park, who had worked tirelessly all his life and became self-made. After raising his children, he entered old age feeling increasingly isolated. One day, a woman came into his life with a warm, inviting smile, like the spring sunshine. She said that sharing love keeps the heart young and healthy, and she began caring for Mr. Park every day. Before long, the two grew close. After a few months, she suggested, "Why don't we truly become one? You have a lot of things to buy, right? I'll take care of everything for you. Trust me with your bank book." At that moment, a verse from the Buddhist scriptures flickered in Mr. Park's mind. Stealing others' hearts leads to losing one's path. But despite his hesitation, he was swayed by her kindness. She took care of his needs, helped with his burdens, and brought joy into his life with her warm smile. What happened next? Mr. Park, driven by loneliness and the desire to share love, handed over his bank book. The very next day, she vanished without a trace. Sitting alone in his empty room, Mr. Park reflected on a saying, "Too much is as bad as too little." The same principle applies to love. Overgiving, excessive trust, and unchecked emotions can turn toxic. By the time Mr. Park realized his mistake, it was too late. He thought to himself, "If I had enough money, I wouldn't have to worry about it for the rest of my life." But I couldn't bear the loneliness and greedily sought out pleasure, only to lose my money and face the consequences. Psychologically, people who prey on others' vulnerabilities are often called emotional predators. They target the weaknesses of others, manipulate emotions, and ultimately take what they want, leaving the other person empty. Ellen DeGeneres, the famous American broadcaster and comedian, once said, "We often learn our greatest lessons when we are at our weakest." It's a truth we must all recognize. Only through experiencing pain do we develop real strength. One day, during a family gathering, my eldest daughter asked, "Dad, why did Grandpa do that?" To her question, my father quietly responded, Everyone wants to love, but you must have the wisdom to go with it. Buddhist scriptures also say, love without wisdom is helplessness. Wisdom without love is coldness. Finding a balance between the two is the true challenge of life. Now, I pose this question to you. Which is more important, love or something else? Or perhaps, what is truly necessary in our lives if it's not love or anything else? Use today's reflection to think about this. It's fine to seek companionship to fill loneliness, but the most important thing is to never lose yourself in the process. The most effective practical method is simple. Know your worth and protect yourself. Whether it's love or money, don't be consumed by it. Protect your center and make choices from a place of strength. The phrase to engrave in your heart today is, love wisely. How about committing to this today? Try saying it aloud. I respect myself, understand the value of love, and make wise choices. Finally, legendary rock singer Freddie Mercury left this insight before passing away. Love is everything we have. The rest is just small things in the world. In our lives, it's essential to protect true love and allow it to help us grow. Secondly, easily swayed by physical greed at older ages. Do you know that a strong flame can consume itself with its heat? The same can be said for love and desire. As we age, loneliness and longing can flare up like embers, igniting a fire inside us. However, if this fire burns too fiercely, it can easily consume everything in its path, leaving nothing behind but emptiness. I once knew a grandmother in the neighborhood, well over 80 years old, yet she was always full of life and beloved by everyone in town. One day, however, she appeared at a village gathering looking unusually well-dressed. People were curious but didn't ask her about it directly. As time passed, she started spending more time with a young man from the village, and she began to talk more openly about him. People started to whisper, laughing and joking about the possibility of a late romance. They smiled, agreeing that it was harmless. She, however, dismissed all the gossip, confidently proclaiming that love knows no age. But in the end, after the man took her property and disappeared, she was left to face the painful reality. Reflecting on her experience, she recalled a passage from the Buddhist scriptures. Desire is like a burning arrow. Behind the fleeting joy lies deep wounds. Desire gives temporary sweetness, but its end always leads to emptiness. The truth of this passage became painfully clear to her as she realized how unchecked desire had led her down a path of regret. Psychologists have noted that while our bodies may change as we age, our emotional needs do not diminish. The loneliness of old age can amplify desires, particularly physical ones. But if we cannot manage these desires wisely, we risk losing ourselves. The Myong Shim Bogam, an ancient text, offers this wisdom. If you do not control your greed, you will not attain peace of mind. This is not simply an old saying, but a timeless truth that remains valid today. Consider the words of Elvis Presley, a man who was no stranger to fame and fortune. He once confessed, "I tried to fill my emptiness with something else, but in the end, I almost lost myself." Despite having more than most people could dream of, his inner thirst remained unquenched. Our desires are endless, and true wisdom lies in managing and overcoming that thirst. One day, during a family gathering, my older uncle shared a story that left a lasting impression. I once met someone who made me feel young again, filled with excitement. But in the end, that person was more interested in my wallet than my heart. Everyone laughed at his story, but there was a trace of bitterness in my uncle's eyes. It was a lesson learned the hard way. Excessive desire can cloud our judgment, and we must protect our hearts from being consumed by it. Buddhist scriptures also say, "Those who guard their hearts are the true victors." The goal of life, then, is not to be swayed by fleeting desires, but to find balance and peace within ourselves. Now, I would like to suggest a practical method. The most effective way is to manage your desires and protect yourself. Pay attention to your heart and mind, and avoid getting swept away by excessive desires. By doing so, you can find peace within yourself, even in the face of temptation. The phrase to engrave in your heart today is, "I manage my desires and wisely protect my life." How about committing to this today? Try saying it aloud. I manage my desires wisely and do not lose myself. Finally, there's a quote from the legendary founder of Apple, Steve Jobs. Simple can be harder than complex. You have to work hard to get your thinking clean to make it simple. Isn't it important to let go of complicated desires and return to a place of simplicity, where we can truly find our authentic selves? Thirdly, beware of the obsession to fulfill your greed. Do you know that when your greed becomes too large, it can swallow you whole? Greed is like an endless well. It seems to have no bottom. No matter how much you try to fill it, it remains empty. The more you pour into it, the deeper and darker the hole becomes. Similarly, greed leads to obsession, and obsession ultimately consumes us from within. There was a woman in my neighborhood who would constantly proclaim, "I'm the best." She always carried herself with confidence and pride, filling her life with a sense of superiority. But this pride, while empowering, created distance between her and others. One day, she met someone and insisted that he was the best, capable of doing everything. She set such high expectations for him, demanding that he align every action, every word, and even every emotion with her standard of perfection. Eventually, overwhelmed by her obsessive behavior, the man walked away, and she found herself alone. At that moment, she remembered a passage from the Buddhist scriptures. Obsession is the root of suffering, and greed eats away at the heart. Psychologists would label this behavior as an egocentric personality. When self-love becomes excessive, you lose the ability to empathize with others, and all relationships become unbalanced. Relationships, much like a tug of war, rely on balance. If one side pulls too hard, the other side has no choice but to break free. The Myeong-shim Bogam, an important text in Korean philosophy, teaches us, excessive desire brings anger. Greed disrupts balance and creates dependency in relationships. This lesson is not just for personal growth. It reminds us of the well-known story of Hong Gil-dong. In this classic tale, Hong Gil-dong's brothers, obsessed with their father's affection and the family's reputation, lose their bond and become tangled in their greed. Greed has the destructive power to unravel relationships and distort our hearts. During one of our family gatherings, my younger uncle proudly declared himself the best businessman in the family. He often lectured others on his supposed superiority. One day, he loudly proclaimed, "I'm the best." But my older uncle quietly responded, "We all know that without you shouting. But it seems you only believe it when you shout it out loud." Everyone laughed, but there was a brief moment of sadness in my younger uncle's eyes. It was a reminder that, while people desire recognition, obsession with it can drive others away. Buddhist teachings emphasize, to be empty is to be filled. Only by letting go of obsession and greed can we discover genuine relationships and peace. So, what place does greed hold in your life? How can you cultivate relationships without letting obsession take control? I encourage you to reflect on these questions today. Think about how you can build relationships that are rooted in respect, without excessive greed. The most effective method to practice this is simple. Let go of your own greed and strive to balance with others. Discard the obsession to elevate yourself too much and take the time to understand the hearts of others. This is the first step to forming meaningful relationships. The phrase you should engrave in your heart today is, "Let go of greed and embrace others." How about pledging this today? Try saying it aloud. I let go of my greed and maintain a balance between myself and others. Finally, there is a powerful quote from the legendary Michael Jackson. If you don't change the person in the mirror, you can't change the world. In our lives, the first step to changing the world around us is to let go of greed and obsession and begin by looking inward and reflecting on ourselves. Fourth, manage the desire to emotionally depend on others well. Do you know that a person's heart is like a boat floating on water? When the boat remains still, it simply flows along, but if a heavy burden shifts it to one side, it easily tips over. As we age, loneliness often feels like waves crashing against the boat, challenging our balance and stability. It's only natural to want to emotionally depend on someone, but when those expectations go unmet, it can lead to disappointment, creating even bigger waves. There was a woman named Eun Jong in our neighborhood, a bright and lively woman, loved by all. After her separation from her husband, her heart gradually became calm and quiet. But as the calm deepened, she found herself turning to others for emotional support. One day, she grew close to a man in the village and began relying on him emotionally to get through each day. At first, he was attentive, but soon, his attitude shifted. He was no longer there when she needed him most. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, Please comment 5 below to let me know that you are still here with me. At that moment, Eunjong recalled a passage from the Buddhist scriptures. Those who rely on others will never find their oath. In the end, she had to take control of herself, learn to stand on her own and manage her emotional needs without relying too much on others. Psychologically, the desire to find stability in relationships is called attachment. While attachment is essential for healthy relationships, excessive attachment can disrupt one's emotional balance and lead to dependency. In the Myeong Shim Bogam, a Korean Confucian text, it says, "Those who rely on others are anxious, and those who are independent are peaceful." The path to controlling your heart starts with looking inward, facing your emotions, and learning to handle loneliness on your own. A story from the classic novel The Old Man and the Sea comes to mind. In this story, the protagonist, Santiago, fights alone against a giant marlin in the sea, but through his solitude, he discovers his true self. His solitary battle symbolizes the inner strength we should all aspire to find within ourselves. I remember a piece of advice my eldest brother once shared with me. If you're lonely, it's better to find your own heart than to seek someone else's. His words have stayed with me, resonating with wisdom. During a family gathering, my nephew once asked, "Dad, why did Grandpa trust people so easily?" My father, with a quiet smile, replied, "The core of that trust should be yourself." Much like the saying, "Study by day, work by night," which encourages managing our efforts and will, we must learn to manage our emotional needs. Can you rely on yourself? When the desire to lean on someone arises, can you ensure that it doesn't shake your inner stability? Take a moment today to reflect on how you can control your heart before turning to others for emotional support. The most effective way to practice this is simple. Control your own heart, do not lose your center, and even in loneliness, find strength within yourself. The phrase to engrave in your heart today is, "I believe in myself and find peace within me." How about pledging this for today? Try following along. I do not rely on others and control my own heart. Finally, there's a powerful quote from the world-renowned singer Beyoncé. If you don't love yourself, no one else will. In our lives, true strength and willpower begin with self-love. Through today's story, I hope you've gained some insight into how to manage the desire to emotionally depend on others and how to overcome loneliness on your own. We all possess the ability to stay centered and find peace through our strength. May you trust in your inner strength and protect yourself, even in loneliness, today. Thank you for joining me today as we explored important lessons on love, emotional independence, and personal growth in older age. We've touched on how to guard ourselves against gold-digging scammers, the dangers of being swayed by physical desires, the importance of managing greed, and learning to rely on ourselves for emotional stability. So, what have you learned so far? Which of these lessons resonated with you the most? What's one thing that you'll practice in your own life after watching this video? Please share your thoughts with us in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you've taken away from today's video. If you like this video, please leave your comment below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more content like this. Your support means the world to us and helps us continue creating valuable content for you. Until next time, take care of yourself and keep embracing the wisdom of aging.